Okay, so thanks everybody for being here again. It's always an honor to have people show up when you open a meeting like this. And we're going to talk today with Dave Connery, my friend, and also our fellow train crew member. I first met Dave about 4 or 5 years ago, if I remember right. And there's too much really to say about introductions. So maybe, Dave, if you'd like, you can tell the friendly folks something about yourself, whatever you think is relevant, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, railroading is kind of, I don't ever remember not being interested in railroading. I grew up in a railroad family. My grandfather and one of my uncles immigrated from England to work on the railroads. He was a blacksmith. My grandfather was a blacksmith, and my uncle was a helper. They worked on the railroads in England. They came here to the U.S. The rest of the family immigrated. My mother had a brother and 3 sisters. Her brother worked for the railroad. He became a brakeman and then a freight conductor. Her 3 sisters all married railroaders. One married, one of them married that blacksmith helper. One of them married a person who was a freight clerk in the West. I grew up in the area around Albany, New York, Albany and Rensselaer, New York. He was a freight clerk for the New York Central. And the third aunt married a person who worked on the Boston and Albany as a railway postal clerk between Springfield, Massachusetts, and Albany. And then my cousins, most of them, the males, worked for the railroad. My one cousin worked for the D&H. He started out as a surveyor, and when he retired, he was assistant chief engineer for the D&H. And another cousin was an assistant trainmaster and then later trainmaster for the New York Central. And another cousin was a passenger locomotive engineer and shop steward. So whenever we had family get-togethers, all the talk would always be railroad talk. So I'm very comfortable with railroading. In addition, where we lived, which was on the west side of Albany, towards Schenectady, we lived about a third of a mile or half of a mile from the New York Central 4-track main line heading west. So as a kid, as a teenager, probably from the age of 10 or 11 up until 15 or 16, we hung around on those tracks a lot, got ourselves in lots of trouble. Some funny stories when right near there, they had a team track. And so we quickly learned on our way to a swimming hole, we quickly learned that in the summer when they had Fruit Express reefers there, that they probably were melon cars. And so we realized that if we checked around there, a lot of times there would be a broken melon because somebody would be in a truck outside and they would unload the car to the pickup truck or stake truck, and they'd throw the melons and catch them and put them in the bed. And if they dropped one, it would break and they just leave it there. So if we got there quickly, before the ants got there, we'd have some free watermelon. That was, as a kid, a cool thing. So the railroad, when it came through there was a large reservoir. It's called 6 Mile Waterworks. It's 6 miles west of downtown Albany. And then they had dammed up Patroon Creek, and the railroad kind of followed the creek up. So when it got to that reservoir, as it cut across, it actually cut across the edge of the reservoir, and it created 2 small little reservoirs. One of them was a kind of a public swimming area. The whole area had been an old ocean bottom, so there was all sand. So it was a good sand. It wasn't ocean sand, but it was sand. And then that's where everybody would go for swims. There'd be several hundred people there probably on a hot summer day. But if you walk down the tracks, there was another little section on the other side, and that's where the teenagers would go and hang out. And so, as we were maybe 11, 12, 13, where we swagger over there or be with the big guys. So what would happen is in the morning, a lot of guys would show up, and we all go skinny dipping. And the challenge was to not get caught in the water without a bathing suit when the ladies started to show up, in the early afternoon. And usually there'd always be somebody out there with no suit on, and the other guys running up and down the beach waving his suit saying, "Come on and get it," kind of. So one of the features there was that there was a large tree overhanging the water, and you couldn't really get to this place very easily. You could walk to it, but there was a large area, several miles in all directions, called Pine Bush, that had no developed roads. There were just a couple of dirt ruts, but you could drive into this, and the teenagers who had cars would. But some of the older guys had hung a cable from this tree up real high, and it was a long, thin piece of body of water, and on one side of it was the railroad track, and the railroad track was probably 20 or 25 feet above the surface of the water. They had made a big fill out of it. And so you get on the opposite bank, and you'd swing out, and then you could drop down, and that would be in deep water. But even to make it a better ride, they had built a signal tower, lashed a signal tower on the thing. And there was a way where if you climbed up the tower, somebody could swing out and they could swing back. And as they kicked their feet forward, just as they got to ground, they would snap their body, and they could send the cable that had a triangle on the bottom of it up to you, and you'd grab it, and then you'd have a really great ride out there. But what the fun was is that if you were swinging out there in the morning, skinny dipping, you would be just even with in about 25 feet from the windows of passing trains. And it was always a thrill to see the horror on the faces of the passengers as this naked man was swinging through the air and then dropping right out of their sight in front of them. Like I say, I had a good youth experience with trains.
Yeah, well, I mean, you did mention something about getting in trouble, right?
Yeah. And then I had a third connection. One of my cousins set me up for an interview for a job as a messenger for the New York Central, just as I was about to turn 16. In those days in New York, at 16, you could get working papers from the school and get a job. And so I went for an interview, and I got the job. And so I worked in the telegraph office for about 2.5 years in Albany. There'd be a couple of telegraph operators, teletype operators, a wire chief, myself, and then one person they were still using a key to send messages to some of the stations along the line. And my job was, to a great extent, was going down to the ticket office, picking up information on just what they had sold in each of the cars, the reserve seat and Pullman cars. And then I would go out and meet the conductor at the train as the train came in. He would have a set of similar cards, and he was marked in his cards, so he knew where berths and roomettes and that had to be made up. And then he would also know what was vacant so that he could sell it on board. And then I would take any marks he made, any places he had sold, down to the ticket office. And so I was working in Union Station in Albany, New York, but it was a great job because I did get around trains a lot.
I have a question, Dave. Did you really like trains, or was it something that just happened to always be there?
Well, it just was always there, I think, John. I never questioned it. I didn't even think about not having trains a part of your everyday life. It just was the way our family worked. Everybody was talking about and involved in it. And the family, when it traveled, our family didn't have them, but most of everybody else in the family had passes. And in fact, sometimes as a kid, they would take myself and my sister with them on trips on the train, and they get passes for us.
Right. That's interesting. Growing up and seeing trains as something special or different compared to what you're describing, it was seeing trains as something that's just a part of everyday life.
Yeah,
I think there's
pretty much.
Interesting contrast there. I've talked to a lot of people who have worked on railroads, and a lot of them tell me they don't even want to do modeling because they deal with trains all day as a job. Do you know what I mean? So what made you get interested into? Well,
as a kid, I always wanted a train set, and probably when I was 9 or 10, my parents got me an American Flyer train set. I guess my cousin had influenced them on what to choose. Most of my friends had Lionel, and as it turned out, the American Flyer actually was a good choice because instead of AC, it was operating on DC. And so I quickly learned some of the problems with reverse loops in the shorts that they cause and things like that. So I had an early introduction to those impact of two-rail DC. But I think one of the things that later on drove me was one time in Cub Scouts. I was in Cub Scouts, and we had gone to visit a roundhouse, the one my uncle worked in, as a matter of fact. But then one night, one of the dads took a group of us, and probably there's been 6 or 8 of us, or maybe so, to visit an adult model railroad club in Albany. It was on an upper floor of a building right on the main street. And I was totally knocked off my feet because here were all these men running this beautiful big layout, very prototypical looking, for me at the time, compared to the kind of little tunnels and that I would build for my American Flyer set. And I never forgot that. I always had that in my mind, as saying someday I would really like to do that. Although I've never been a member of a club, I've always kind of been a lone wolf modeler in some respects.
I mean, you're a lone wolf as far as doing your own stuff, but you're involved with our local organizations plenty.
I am. We can talk about that. I'm involved with a lot of things, and I've been in a round robin group. We started it in 1993, I think, and I think today I'm really the only completely active original member. But we still have today we meet by Zoom every week, but we've met every week since all those many years. Right,
in person. So
yeah.
I mean, it's interesting how this is a totally different subject, but it's interesting how the pandemic has affected people's ability to get together, but we still get together virtually, and I think that's pretty cool.
And I noticed that some of the people that I was used to seeing regularly at face-to-face events, the ones I see on Zoom meetings and that are a different group of people.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the pandemic has brought out or kind of opened the door to some people who weren't really into those kind of face-to-face encounters.
Well, I think about our PCR meetings, our virtual PCR meetings, and there are quite a few people on there.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing to me is that having seen those people at the meetings, but not knowing who they are, so you don't talk to them, but then you get to hear them talking on the meeting, and you find out that you've been missing out on pretty interesting people.
Exactly, John. Exactly.
So,
well, anyway, that's kind of how I got started. One of the things, I had been to a hobby shop and I bought something, I think a crossing signal or something, and I tried to put it on my S-scale American Flyer layout, and it was clearly too small. I thought, gee, they made this all wrong. And that's when I first really began to understand about the various scales. I had already understood that there was some gauge differences between my equipment and my friend's Lionel stuff, but also then HO. And so I got a couple kits, and I built a nice wood Santa Fe caboose, painted it, lettered it, and I entered it in a little contest the PTA was having at school. And I took first place in crafts or something. I don't know what the category was. But anyway, that really kind of juiced me up into building things.
That's interesting. So something from a school perspective, it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things that we talk about nowadays is getting kids involved and figuring out ways to have, whether it's the NMRA or someone else, getting involved with school, because school is emphasizing science, technology, engineering, art, and math, right? STEAM or STEM as it originated. And here's this hobby that is a very accessible hobby for most people, and the schools generally just kind of, blow it off. You'd mentioned something in our notes about your first disastrous attempt at a train room. You want to talk about that?
Sure. Hey, well, I as an adult, again, it was through Cub Scouting. My stepson was in Cub Scouts, and we were working on a project. One month we did railroads, and we had, one of the fathers had gotten, I think, somebody to donate a bunch of Athearn blue box boxcars. I think they were marked $1.25, the price on them. But anyway, every kid got an undecorated one, and the job was to, with your dad, decorate up the car. So he and I had some old oil paints, and we painted the car with oil paints and put a decal on it, and thought we'd done a pretty good job, but didn't do very well in the popular vote contest at the Cub Scout meeting. But that got me interested, and so I bought him a train set, and we set up a little 4x8 piece of plywood on some sawhorses in the garage, and tried to make a kit or two. And then so I decided, no, this isn't working. We need a better place to do this. And the house we had at the time was a tri-level, which meant that over the one-story part, there was this fairly large empty space. So I put a door in from his closet into this empty space, and I was building a room up there. I had a friend that was an architect, and he had one of the engineers in his firm take a look at, when I drew what the joist looks like, how I could support it strong enough so for people to be in that space. And he basically said, if you just double all the beams, double every beam, you'll be well protected. So one Saturday morning, I'm up there working, and I'm putting down some flooring with just joist at the time. And I'm putting down some 3/4-inch plywood flooring. And downstairs in the kitchen, immediately under me, my wife is sitting having a cup of coffee with my baby daughter. And as I'm twisting this 4x8 sheet of plywood, my foot slipped off the joist and crashed down through the ceiling. So I'm standing, but of course my foot comes down right over the kitchen table with a bunch of insulation and everything right down onto her cup of coffee. She started screaming at me. The baby's screaming, of course. She picks up the baby and says, "I'm going shopping," which is usually, she knew that would always upset me, because money was pretty tight in those days, and I didn't want her to go shopping. Anyway, and so I'm left hanging there, and it's obviously pretty sore because it falling right down through the ceiling, scraping my leg and other parts pretty badly. So I had the ceiling repaired, and I think the end of the marriage was 2 or 3 weeks later. We were in divorce proceedings. So
that is pretty disastrous.
Yes, so that was not a good start to building a model railroad.
But you can look at it another way too, is that if you were just getting that started and that was all it took for her to go shopping,
right,
you're probably better off.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, everything always turns out for the best. So
I think that's a matter of your attitude, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess. So then the next thing, a while later, I have a girlfriend, and I think as a gag gift, she gave me. I've been talking about how I really wanted to build this model railroad. She bought this little train set for me, AHO. It was exactly the same set I'd given my stepson, and so that kind of said, "Oh, okay, this is going to be okay. I can do this." So I started to build, and I built a standalone, kind of a 5x9 layout. But that kind of relationship went sour. Ultimately, I gave away that layout. And then I got involved in a lot of other things. One of the things I got involved with was a thing called private road name modeling. That was where you're modeling a fictitious railroad with your own name in that. And I got into that. I had decals made. I had passes done. I would exchange passes with people. I probably exchanged several hundred, 300-400 passes with people all over the world. Come visit my layout. I didn't have one, but then they thought they could, and a lot of cars and a lot of sets of decals and things. Anyway, I did that for a while I was living in an apartment and didn't have space for any place to build a layout really.
When all this stuff was happening, were you still living back east, or had you moved out here?
No, I was in California. I've been living in California. I've been in California since 1965. I think when I got out of the Air Force, I moved to California.
Okay. So all this stuff that you've been recounting, other than the stuff that was obviously when you were a kid,
Yeah,
that all
yeah,
happened in California?
have all happened here in California. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely.
I was just curious because I'm trying to imagine this as you're telling the story, and putting a place to it makes sense to me.
And in the meantime, I'd done a couple things. I was at the library one day, and I saw a book called Sierra Railway, and I picked it up. I had ridden on the Sierra Railtown 1897. It was in those days run by the railroad itself. Today it's a state park, but it was run by the. And so I was interested in that, and I read the book, and then at the same time, I my first visit to Jack Burgess's house, and he would just fairly early on in the building of his YV layout, but some of the scenes just really blew me away. I said, my goodness, that's what a wonderful idea to model a prototype that closely. And I probably visited his house maybe 15 times over the years. I look at him as a wonderful inspiration and a good friend. So anyway, I had that in the back of my mind, and then I read the book, The Silver Short Line by Werman DeMorrow on the Virginia Truckee, and I said, well, here's another railroad that would be wonderful to model. So ultimately, that's what I modeled. I modeled the two of them.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that silver book on the layout tour video that we did at your house.
Probably did.
Before you took your layout, dismantled it.
Yeah. So
that's interesting. When did you start building that layout that was featured on the channel?
Well, we moved to this house in 1985, and I had been living in a condo, and I had started a layout, and actually I took that down, saved some of the bench work, and then when we moved into this house, as soon as I could, I got the garage kind of cleared out, and I built the room for the layout, and that was the really right thing to do. I'm really convinced that if you can make a nice environment for a layout, you've got a lot of you're going a long way towards having a good layout. So I built the room. It took me about 2 years to do that, and it was the best, most secure, best insulated, strongest. If for an earthquake or anything, that's where everybody should really run, is to the layout room, because it was really solid. And so I started in 85, but I probably, the first thing, of course, was the bench work. And then I went to an NRA convention, and the first clinic, I sit down, and I'm sitting next to a guy, and I thought I kind of recognized him. And so we started talking while we were waiting for the clinic to get started. And it turned out we live only a mile apart. And his name is Al Massey. And so we decided, hey, we've got to get together. But then other things intervened. I was working at the time. I think he was too. We're both. But ultimately, both of us ended our careers. But so we got together, and he became a good friend. He unfortunately now, I should say unfortunately, he lives in South Carolina, so we don't get to see each other. We just once in a while. But he had a major impact on me, because he really could turn a brass locomotive into a beautifully performing piece of equipment, and that was something I never had been successful at, or hadn't done any of that really. So with Al, and he helped on the layout, but he also redid a number of my locomotives, and it made a huge difference in the way the equipment operated.
I think I remember the name Al Massey. He was also the one who did all the weathering on the locomotives on your layout, right?
He did. And he did work for in fact, I kept telling him, I said, Al, you have this skill. You ought to use it. There's modelers everywhere that would really love to have you work on some of their equipment. And so he ultimately developed quite a business to the point where he wasn't in the hobby anymore. He was working full time, just doing other people's locomotives, installing DCC and sound. Right. But one of his signature things, almost always, if you look at a locomotive, if you see a guy smoking in the cab, then Al did that, because he put a little cigarette in the guy's mouth usually.
Yeah, I remember that from Otis McGee's layout also.
Right.
He must have done a lot of Otis.
He did. He did a lot of work for Otis.
Yeah, there were a lot of smokers.
He may still be doing work for Otis. I'm not sure. I know for a while Otis was sending his locomotives back to Al in South Carolina to work on them.
Well, they look good. I mean, the ones on your layout looked really amazing also. Probably should mention that if anybody is watching this later on, because like I said, I was going to record this and probably release it, you can find the layout tour of Dave's layout on, just search for Sierra, Carson, and Truckee, if I remember right, here on the channel, and you'll find the layout tour. It was a really beautiful layout. So, yeah. So now you mentioned that you'd built the separate room in the garage, and how many helixes did you have? I don't remember. I know there was
I had a
Reno.
double track standard gauge helix and a single track narrow gauge HON3 helix at the opposite end of the room. And I would never suggest people put a helix in. They're a terrible thing. I hated them after I got it done there, but it was to the point where I couldn't undo it really. But you know, a train goes into a helix and it just gets lost. It seems forever before it gets out. And that one helix was 8 levels, and it would just take forever. And then, you know, if you're going to have a problem, it's going to be in the helix. It's not anywhere where it's easy to work. And so I actually, if I were to do it over again, I might do a two level layout, but they would be 2 separate levels. They wouldn't be connected. Okay. Because that's really the way I ran it. I never ran trains between levels on the helixes.
I was going to ask you about that too, because the room that it was in was kind of a cramped space.
Very.
I'm just curious. This is not a question that we talked about ahead of time, but I'm kind of curious. Did you ever reimagine a layout design that you could have used in that same space, that you could have done it without a helix? Or
yeah, I'm not really into layout design, so I never really did that, John. See, but I tell you, when I designed that, I was working in San Francisco, commuting from here in the East Bay, and so I would commute on BART, and I spent a lot of trips in and out of the city, sketching different plans. But my whole objective was to see how much layout I could get in the space I had allocated to myself, never thinking that anybody other than maybe a visiting relative or somebody would ever see the layout. It wasn't being built for anybody else. It wasn't being built for operation. It was being built strictly just for a platform for me to build models and display them for my own satisfaction.
Right, and I think that brings up something that I think is interesting, which is a lot of people especially on the layout tour videos that I do, comment, especially on Jack's layout in his series. You know, we have that series that I do with Jack on every other month. And they say that, oh, it's such a shame, you know, that he doesn't operate the layout. And it's like, well, he's a builder. You're a builder. And I think that it's an interesting aspect, if you think about it, that operations is just one thing. And not everybody's into that. And it's okay, because there are so many different ways to enjoy the hobby. And I think you found a way. And I like how you described that your layout is a place to put the models that you want to build. I think that's an interesting way to describe that. So,
well, you know, I suppose every hobby is like that. But certainly for me, railroading and model railroading, it's always been one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. So there's a lot of things that I've gotten into over the years that I had no intention of ever doing. I didn't know I had any interest in it, but over the time, that interest developed. I wanted to build some buildings of the Sierra. So I was up at Railtown, 1897 State Park, and I'm measuring buildings. And at the time, they weren't actually running trains, but the docents were just running the gift shop and giving tours of the roundhouse and things. And so they're going to close up, and the guy comes out and says, well, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm just measuring. He says, well, you got to get out of here. And I said, well, I'm not going to hurt anything. I'm just measuring. I'm going to be very careful. He says, get out of here. You can't, we're locking this place up. So I got out of there and came right back as soon as they drove out of the driveway, finished measuring what I was measuring. But so a number of months later, I'm at a West Side reunion, and the Docent Association had a table set up, and they were looking for more volunteers, and they were also selling memberships in an organization they were developing called the Sierra Railway Historical Society. And I was with Glenn Southern at the time. So the two of us are standing there, and it's the guy that threw me out is sitting there, and another guy. And so I walked to the other guy to talk to him. And I said, well, he says, yeah, it costs $15 a year, and we expect you to volunteer about 8 hours a month. And I said, gee, I can do that. So but if I want to get the Historical Society and get their publication, it's $25. But if I volunteer, I get the publication for only $15, and so I was going to save $10. so I signed up, and I've been a docent up there ever since. So that was in '92.
Wow, 1992, and actually, if I remember right, Dave, that's where I met you face to face the first time. I was up there.
was there at Railtown, exactly.
Right, I think I was up there with our mutual friend Mike, and he introduced us, and that was so since '92. I'm doing the math now. That's 0212. That's 20. That's almost 30 years.
Yeah, 28 years. Yeah,
all to save $10.
So again, one thing leads to another. So I volunteered to help, do some painting on a building. I thought, well, that'll give me, a chance to do some measuring, checking out and things. And so after I started going up there actually maybe once or twice a week. And so they said, Dave, we really, really need somebody to help with car hosting. Would you please give us a hand? And I said, well, I don't really know anything about that. They said, well, come on down, ride on a couple of trains. And you'll learn what a car host does. So I did that. And they said, well, will you do it now? Or I think maybe they said, well, hey, we don't have anybody else. You're doing it by yourself today. So I started car hosting, and I've been doing that pretty much ever since, and also giving tours of the roundhouse, etc. But so then in the process, that leads to another thing. Then in the process, I realized, gee, I'm talking to people about the history and that, and I don't know that much myself. All I know is what I read in that book. So I started doing some research. I spent a lot of days over at the Bancroft Library at University of California, Berkeley, going through. They have a fairly large collection of stuff, Sierra stuff, and I went through everything and became quite familiar with it. And then somebody said, well, one of the problems is the old timers around here are all dying off, and nobody, knows much about what they did. So I started doing some oral histories. I did like 5 oral histories with railroaders on the Sierra. And I got a lot of interesting stories, a lot of fun stories, a lot of things, a knowledge about a lot of things that the way they actually worked on the railroad. And so that really got me into the history of railroading. And if you look, you can't maybe see behind me, it's actually in front of me, but I got several hundred railroad history books or railroad books.
I see a shelf behind you that's loaded with books, and I remember from being there, your shelves full of railroad.
It comes around 3 sides here. It's in front of me, it's on the side of me, and it's back there.
It's quite a nice, comfortable looking library, to be honest. Yeah,
it is. And it's very handy. I mean, I look in books a lot to find answers. People will ask me questions about stuff. They think I know. I don't know a damn thing, but I do know how to read still.
Oh, you could look it up. That's like a joke I tell people. It's like, I know everything. I just have to look it up with my phone. Now, I have a question that's kind of unrelated to the track we're on, but we can get back. I want to get back to this, but I'm curious. The guy that kicked you out when you were measuring stuff, did he ever realize who you were and realize that he had kicked you out?
I don't think so. He became a good friend. He has since passed away. That's one of the sad things when you're in an organization a long time, like, 98 years, 38 years is 28 years, whatever it is. I've lost an awful lot of good friends that were volunteers there at Railtown over the years.
Yeah, well, it's, part of it, right?
And like I say, one thing keeps leading to another. I got involved in the National Railway Historical Society, and then the Locomotive and the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, and some of their events. One of the things that as a car host, one of the things I became interested in was tourist railroads. So I think I've maybe ridden on about 70 or so tourist railroads all over our country and in a lot of other countries as well. Always seeing how they do things and whether there's some ideas that I could pick up that we could use up at Railtown. And then one of the things that my wife and I really enjoy travel. We travel a lot. Haven't been traveling since we got back at the end of February 1st. We got back and haven't been able to do any since then. But we've traveled through most of the world, and we've ridden on a lot of trains. We like that mode of transportation very much. My wife really has got the point where she doesn't want me to do any driving that I don't have to, particularly in foreign countries, some of which drive on the other side of the road, and you have a lot of complications. And train travel does a couple things for you. One, you have a relaxing vacation because you're not fighting traffic or anything, and you generally, if you're visiting a country, you're generally going from city center to city center, which is perfect. You don't have that car in your way. But one of the most important things is that, unlike on a plane or when you're in your own car, when you're on a train, you get a chance to talk to other people. And that's I think a wonderful experience. You meet a lot of people who are also traveling usually, but also a lot of local people, and I find that a real boost to my travel experience to be on a train rather than in a plane where you don't, you just see the back of the head of somebody in front of you, and there's a great big huge lady sitting in the seat next to you that's flowing all over both your seat and hers.
Of course.
That's
a great picture, Dave.
So. And then, one thing leads to another. So one time at Railtown, this lady comes, and she's the historian for the Stanislaus National Forest, and she said, "Look, I'm looking for some help. We got a trestle out there, and we would like to. I would like to see it incorporated into a trail project. I would like to preserve it. I've already gotten some work done on it. I got a grant, and I had some work done on it, but I need to get." They've said that there's money available if I can get matching funds from a local group that's raising funds, and so I need help with that. And so myself and a few other people said, "Sure, yeah, we'll help." Well, the trestle she had in mind was the Bourland Trestle on the West Side Lumber Company. It was a beautiful trestle. It was still in really good shape. It had the rails had been removed when they wrecked out the railroad, but the trestle was still in quite good shape. And so a group of us got together and we started raising funds to get matching funds so we could have finish the restoration work on the trestle. So one of the things that I did was I said, well, I'll build an HON3 model of the trestle, and we'll use it when we're out giving little talks to groups in that. So I built that trestle, and today it's on exhibit at the Tuolumne County Historical Society. And so that kind of got me interested in the West Side a bit more than I had been. I'd always been a bit of a fan of the West Side, and I had some West Side trackage and a mill on my some HON3 trackage. And so then I kept looking in my backyard, and I said, it would be fun to build that same trestle in 1:20 scale. And so my wife and I convinced her that we could have a garden railway, and we attended a garden railway convention, spent the whole week, 7 days. We looked probably 8 layouts every day for 7 days, garden railways. So we had a real good idea of garden railways. In 1998, we started building a garden railway. And the key feature of it was a model of the Bourland Trestle in 1:20 scale. So we had a creek and the falls put in and a pond, and we moved a lot of soil and a lot of rock, and we moved it again, and we moved it again. They're always in our way, never where it wanted to be. But eventually, so we got into garden railwaying in a big way, and that led at one point. I was working on the 2004 National Narrow Gauge Convention, and the president of the Garden Railway Society was also working on that convention. And he said, "Dave, hey, we got a convention coming up, National Garden Railway Convention coming up. Would you be willing to be the chairman for that convention?" So actually, in the end, my wife Emma and I became co-chairs of the National Garden Railway Convention. We had a great convention in 2006. We had about 1,900 people attend that convention, and it was a really good week of activities. But that was another thing that one led to another. And of course, John, you're very familiar with it because I appreciate very much you and Sydney coming up a couple years ago and running my garden railway during an open house when I was running the HL layout.
Right, we came up and helped, and
yeah, oh yeah, you were critical.
Had a lot of fun. I was curious about that too, since I haven't really asked you about your garden railroad in a while. Is that gone too, or what's the? It status?
Has, yeah. What I took that out before I took right after we did the video and before I took down the HO layout, and all the track that was salvageable, plus all of my equipment, I donated to John Zach, who you've done his layout. Yeah. He's a member of the California State Railroad Museum Foundation. John and I have been friends for 35 years or so, I think now. Yeah,
and a great guy, I should mention.
Yeah, really nice guy, really nice guy. So he put together a project to on the top of the gift shop up at Railtown. They built a around the room shelf with a garden railway or a G scale railroad running on it. And so I had a locomotive that was a good sit-in for Sierra number 34, one of the locomotives in the roundhouse there at Jamestown. And so that in my track and my turnouts in my equipment and in our Sierra Seminar Fund. And so we donated $1,000 to cover some of the out-of-pocket costs.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's good, though, that you have equipment that you know will continue to be used in a good place. You know, it found a good home, and it's not like it's just going to be thrown away or collecting dust in somebody's garage or somebody's attic or something like that. I think that's pretty cool to be able to find a place like that for your stuff, you know. Now, I do want to ask you about the Sierra Seminar and the West Side Reunion. I know that they're two different things, but the same guys were involved with the Sierra Seminar for quite a long time. You want to talk a little bit about that? How did you get?
Well, the West Side the West Side has been going for about 30 some years, and I started attending as an attendee back in probably 88 or 87, somewhere like that, and that's where I met Glenn. And it's always been run separately, but I'm a good friend of Frank Markovich's, who runs it today. And I've always kind of helped out. I shouldn't say always, but in the last 15 or 20 years, I've helped just do some physical stuff, get tables set up, do things like that for whoever was running it, and continue that with Frank. And then Frank has also been instrumental in helping me with some of the program things on the Sierra Seminar. About 12 years ago or 13 years ago, there was an open house in Mariposa, and at the end of the day, John and I both migrated to Glenn's house, and we're sitting around having a hamburger after the open house was all done, and the thought came up, why don't we put something together that we all get together to celebrate the Sierra and study the Sierra and that. And so we had this idea that there were probably maybe 12, maybe 15 people that might be interested in such a thing. So we picked a date, and John said, "Well, we'll be able. We can do it in my offices." He was the manager for H&R Block in Sonora, right. And so we figured, we'd have, like I say, 10, maybe 12 people or so at the thing, and I think 35 people showed up for it. And we cramped for space, and our program just didn't really envision that many people, but we had a great day of it, a really good day, and then we've done it every year since then. Generally, what the pattern has been is in the morning we do sit down presentations, and in the afternoon we do some kind of a field visit. And we've done hikes over most of the sections of the railroad, including most of the abandoned branch lines that built the Maloney's Dam and the Don Pedro Dam, and we've along the Angels Branch we've done a couple of hikes, and in different times. So that's been a rewarding experience, but it's grown to between 70 and 90 people each year, and you've attended a couple of them, so John, you're familiar with it. And it's I think it served a couple of purposes. We call it the Historical and Modelers Seminar, but what we try to do is a sum of both things, both the railroad history, specifically just Tuolumne County railroads. And if it's West Side, we always kind of move them over into the West Side thing. And we do it on the same weekend, West Side on Saturday, the Sierra on Sunday. And so we work with Frank, and Frank has worked with us.
Something worth mentioning also is there's a video on the channel about that as well, about the Sierra Seminar. I still haven't had a chance to go to the West Side reunion event, but I was figuring, since I know Frank now, at some point when we're open again, open for business, we'll definitely go up there.
Well, the plan is, and the reservation is, of course, everything is tentative these days, but has been made that the West Side will be at the same location as the Sierra Seminar this coming year. Next spring.
Is it going to be that same senior center that we've been
senior
going to
center? Yeah,
in Sonora?
That's a nice facility. It's a really nice facility. It's traditionally been at the Elks Club, but they've just about doubled their rates, and it's not economically viable for Frank to use that anymore. And so far, the rates at the senior center have been quite nice. Yeah. And so we were able to, for $15 pre-registration and $20 at the door, and we're able to both rent the space, provide pizza and sodas at lunch, provide coffee and donuts in the morning, and that's worked really good. And one of the key things has been it's been John and Glenn and I that have done it, but also Glenn's wife, Kathy, who's this wonderful, and she makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. I always tell her, I come for the cookies and I stay for the show.
Well, John Zock makes some pretty good chocolate chip cookies too, I hear.
Is that right? I don't know about that.
He said he makes some good chocolate chip cookies. I'm still waiting to get some.
He hasn't ever fed me. Maybe he has. I've been over to his place a lot of times.
But maybe we should arrange a time to go and find out.
Yeah.
I'll drive if you want to go up there. I remember how to get to his place. We'll have to tell him we're coming. So, I do think that the Sierra Seminar is a really cool event, and I thought it was cool enough to show on the channel. So, anyway,
almost every road has some really a good historical society. I know I'm also a member of the Virginia Truckee. We have a conference, about a 2.5-day conference every fall up in Carson City. That's spectacular. It's really good. It's sold out every year.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that too. Maybe we can end with that, just to talk about how did you get involved? Well, I have another question I want to end with, but we'll wind down to it. How did you get involved? Because I know that the Virginia Truckee featured prominently on your layout. And I know about the book, but I mean, did you drive up there and see it and ride it and go, oh, this is really cool, or what? I
did all of that. And then when I was building my layout, I wanted to get the backdrops good. And now my friend Al Massey and another friend, a lady, Denise Showalter, painted the backdrops. I think I mentioned that on the video. But I had gone around and take pictures of every scene that I was modeling. And I had just several hundred pictures of just the scenery taken from about the right of way. And then I kind of sketched in the outline of where the mountain should be and where there should be mesas and things like that. And I put all that down, and then they painted it, because I tried painting it and I made a sloppy mess.
Well, I remember thinking that all the backdrops on your layout were very nicely done. I was really particularly impressed by the ones that the lady.
Oh yeah, she did a beautiful job. She's a real artist.
Yeah, that was really good. I've seen a lot of very good backdrops in the layouts that I've visited, and actually, I recently was at Paul Claffey's layout, and he did his own backdrops, which were also very, very impressive. I don't know if you remember those.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, I do want to ask you one more thing, and I think it'll be a good one to end on, because it could be kind of a fun question, but it has to do with your experience in working at Railtown, volunteering at Railtown. And I'm just kind of curious if you could share with us what's the most interesting or strangest or funniest or oddest thing, something that could be 5 or 6 questions, I guess, if you think about it, but that you've had to deal with working at the Railtown job as a car host.
Well, I mean, for one thing, I really encourage everybody that if there is something like that in their area and close, they almost every volunteer organization or even non-volunteer state organization or other will take volunteers, and they really need it in order to make the ends meet. And it's a wonderful experience working with a lot of different people on a project like that. You have a lot of fun. I know at Railtown, some of us, it almost seems like we ought to be paying them to let us come and do it because it's so much fun. But we had a lot of experiences. I've been, as a car host, in the old days, I say, because after the state took over, they stopped having some of the wine and cheese trains that we used to have, theme trains that we used to have in that. They were afraid, for liability reasons and things like that. State didn't want to support it. So anyway, but I can remember one time we were on a wine and cheese train, and this one lady obviously had been drinking pretty heavy. And we get down and we're doing the runaround. And I think at that time we used to go all the way down to the mill at Chinese. And all of a sudden we get a call on the radio, the crew in the engine says, there's somebody on the roof of the car. And she had climbed out of one of the open cars and climbed up on the roof. And we had to get her down and kind of keep her calmed down till we could get back.
What did she say? Why did she?
Well, she was just, she says that, she was just happy. She was just wanted to get out there and experience the train from the roof.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that. Well,
but one of the things that I really enjoy, I think, John, maybe you were part of it. Every once in a while, we'll do some special trains and we'll have some run-bys. And I really enjoy helping organize those because it's an experience that if you've never had it, it just fills you with the awe of the power of a locomotive when you're standing trackside and a steam locomotive comes roaring by you. And I'm reminded of years ago, my wife and I took a week-long trip down to Ecuador and rode steam trains down there. And we were in the little town of Alicea, and in the morning, the tour coordinator had arranged for a run-by in town. So the town is built on a hillside, and so we all lined ourselves up along the street, and the train is doing street running, so it comes pounding up the hill. But because it's got buildings on both sides, that it's really echoing, and it was a thrilling moment for both myself and my wife, who's not particularly a rail fan, to really feel that the power of the locomotive as it roared through that little town up that hill. And those kind of experiences, I think, are just almost it's something you just don't want to miss if you can experience it.
Yeah, we've talked, and I know that there are a lot of things that we could probably talk for another hour, and we still wouldn't have heard everything that I think are fun and interesting stories. I know you've done a lot of things in your life related to trains, whether it be in your world travels or whatever. But I guess we'll have to save that for the Talk with Dave Connery Part 2.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you very much for thinking of me. I was really surprised when you suggested you wanted to talk to me. I thought, I'm in trouble. John wants to talk to me.
You've done a lot of very cool stuff and are involved in a lot of cool stuff. I do want to thank you and thank everybody for coming to listen to Dave's stories, because I do think that they're worthwhile stories. And that's why I always tell people I'm the president of the Dave Connery fan club.
Thank you, John.
So thanks, Dave. Appreciate that.
Thank you.